Alright, so this whole thing starts with a guy remembering a drive he took back in 2022 along Highway 101 in Northern California. One of those long coastal highways that cuts through forests and quiet stretches where you can drive for miles without seeing much of anything except trees and the occasional pair of headlights passing in the other direction. He said it was supposed to be a normal late-night drive, nothing unusual at all, just him heading home after visiting a friend. But about halfway through the trip, the weather started changing. At first, it was just a light haze hanging over the road, the kind you barely notice unless your headlights catch it. But within minutes, the fog started getting thicker and thicker until it looked like someone had poured gray smoke across the highway. Visibility dropped fast. The trees along the road faded into blurry shadows, and the reflective lines on the asphalt became the only reliable guide he had. Eventually, he realized he could barely see 20 feet ahead of his car, which forced him to slow down a lot more than he wanted to. Because driving through fog like that feels like moving through a tunnel where anything could suddenly appear in front of you. Every signpost seemed to jump out of nowhere and disappear behind him just as quickly. Every curve in the road made his stomach tighten a little because he had no idea what might be waiting around it. But the road itself was empty. No traffic around him, no taillights ahead, just silence and fog and the steady hum of the engine. Then, out of nowhere, he noticed something standing near the edge of the road up ahead. At first, he thought it was a mailbox or maybe a mile marker pole because it was just a dark vertical shape cutting through the fog. But as he got closer, the shape shifted slightly and he realized it was a person. Someone was standing on the shoulder of the highway facing the road. No flashlight, no reflective vest, no car parked nearby. Just a dark silhouette standing there as his headlights passed over them for a split second. It was strange, sure, but not impossible. People's cars break down all the time. Maybe someone was waiting for help or trying to get a signal on their phone. So he drove past and kept going, trying not to think too much about it. About a minute later, though, as the fog kept swallowing the road ahead, another figure appeared in almost the exact same position on the shoulder. Same posture, same stillness, same dark shape barely visible through the mist. That's when he started feeling a little uneasy, because there hadn't been any side roads or driveways between those two spots. And the forest along that part of the highway is thick and uneven. Definitely not the kind of terrain someone could sprint through to get ahead of a moving car. But he tried to rationalize it anyway. Maybe the first person had a friend nearby. Maybe there were two people walking together who had gotten separated in the fog. It was weird, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. So again, he drove past, headlights washing over the figure for just a second before it disappeared behind him in the gray mist. But then it happened again. Another minute or two down the road, another identical silhouette appeared standing quietly at the roadside. By this point, he was gripping the steering wheel tighter without even realizing it because the pattern made no sense. Three figures, all standing the same way, all appearing one after another along a stretch of road where he hadn't seen a single trail or path leading through the forest. The fog made it impossible to see their faces or clothing clearly, but the outlines looked the same each time. Just a tall human shape facing the highway, motionless as his car passed by. He started doing the math in his head, trying to figure out if there was any logical explanation, but every possibility fell apart the more he thought about it. The woods were too dense for someone to move that quickly through them, and even if there were multiple people out there, why would they all just be standing silently along the shoulder in the middle of the night? Still, he kept driving because stopping in fog like that felt even worse than continuing. He just wanted to reach the next town and get off that stretch of highway. But then something happened that made everything feel a lot more serious. As he rounded a gentle bend in the road, another dark shape appeared ahead of him through the fog. Except this time it wasn't standing on the shoulder. It was standing directly in his lane, right in the middle of the road. He slammed the brakes instinctively, and the tires squealed slightly on the damp pavement as the car slowed hard. His headlights lit up the figure for a moment, just enough for him to see the outline of someone standing there without moving. At the exact same time, he glanced in his rearview mirror and noticed something else emerging through the fog behind him. Headlights. Another car was coming up the highway fast, and from the way the lights were growing brighter, it didn't look like the driver had noticed he'd stopped. For a few terrifying seconds, he felt completely trapped between two things he couldn't control: the figure standing in front of his car and the vehicle rushing toward him from behind. He tried to steer around the person in the road, but with visibility that bad he couldn't tell how far the shoulder dropped off. Then everything happened at once. A loud crash echoed through the fog as the car behind him slammed into his rear bumper, jolting his vehicle forward. The impact shoved him a few feet ahead, and the figure that had been standing in the road vanished from the headlights as if it had never been there at all. After the shock settled, he sat there for a moment with his heart racing before stepping out to check the damage. The other driver climbed out too, looking confused and apologizing immediately. The rear bumper of his car was badly dented, but when they inspected the impact, something strange stood out. There was no paint transfer. Normally, when two vehicles collide, you see streaks of color from the other car, but the damage on his bumper didn't match the vehicle behind him. It looked like something else had been struck first, something solid enough to leave a dent. But there was nothing on the road. No person, no debris, no sign that anyone had been standing there at all. Just fog drifting silently over the empty highway. The second story comes from a guy named Liam, who had a strange experience during spring break, while visiting the quiet suburban town where he grew up. Like a lot of people who return home after being away for a while, he liked revisiting the little routines he used to have when he lived there. And one of those routines was going for a run along a wooded trail on the edge of town. The trail wasn't anything complicated, just a dirt path that looped through the trees for a little over 2 miles before bringing you back to the same entrance. Liam had run that loop dozens of times growing up, so he knew exactly how long it should take. On the morning of the run, the weather looked eerie but calm. Fog hung low over the neighborhood streets, thick enough that houses across the road looked faded and distant. The woods near the trail entrance looked even darker because the mist swallowed. Most of the sunlight trying to reach the ground, but he didn't think much of it. If anything, he figured the fog would make the run more peaceful since fewer people would be out. So he started jogging along the trail with his GPS watch tracking his distance like usual. For the first few minutes, everything felt completely normal. Just the steady rhythm of his footsteps on the dirt and the occasional sound of birds somewhere deeper in the trees. But eventually, he started noticing another sound mixed into the quiet. A low humming noise. At first, it reminded him of a small drone flying somewhere nearby, the kind people use for aerial videos. The weird part, though, was how the sound behaved. Every time he sped up, the hum seemed to keep the same distance behind him. When he slowed down, it slowed too. And whenever he turned his head to try and locate where it was coming from, the direction shifted slightly, as if the source was circling him just outside his field of vision. He tried ignoring it and focused on the run, figuring someone in the neighborhood might be flying a drone over the trees. But after a while, he glanced down at his watch and noticed something that didn't make any sense. According to the display, he had already run nearly 4 miles. That couldn't be right because the entire trail loop wasn't even half that distance yet. He assumed the GPS was glitching because of the heavy tree cover and fog, which can interfere with signals sometimes, so he shrugged it off and kept moving. But the numbers kept climbing. 5 miles, then 6. Even though he was absolutely certain he had already passed the landmarks that meant he should be approaching the end of the trail. The humming sound never went away either. It hovered around him the entire time, rising and falling in volume like something pacing him through the woods. By the time he finally reached the part of the trail where the trees opened up near the road, his watch claimed he had traveled more than 8 miles. He stopped near the edge of the woods, breathing heavily and trying to process how that was even possible. That's when he looked back into the foggy tree line behind him. At first he thought he was just seeing shadows between the trunks, but then one of those shadows shifted slightly. A tall, dark silhouette stood several yards inside the forest, barely visible through the mist. The shape was strangely narrow and seemed taller than any normal person should be. It swayed gently from side to side, like something balancing slowly in place. The fog made it impossible to see any details beyond that outline, but the proportions looked wrong. Long arms, thin body, head tilted slightly forward. Liam stood there staring at it, trying to convince himself it was just a tree bending in the fog, but none of the surrounding branches were moving. Then the humming noise returned again, louder this time, vibrating faintly through the air around him. The silhouette leaned forward just a little, and that was enough to snap him out of whatever frozen curiosity had kept him there. He turned around and jogged quickly back toward the neighborhood streets, not stopping until the houses were clearly visible again. Later that day, he checked the GPS data from his watch, and the map line showed a normal 2-mile loop through the woods. But the distance counter still read over 8 miles traveled. Even now he says he can't explain what caused the signal to behave that way or what that shape in the fog might have been. The final story comes from Rodolfo, who had an unsettling experience while kayaking with his friend Edwin in Willapa Bay one quiet afternoon. They had gone out there planning a relaxed paddle along the shoreline, exploring the calm water and enjoying the view of the surrounding forests. When they first arrived, the weather looked fine, but as they pushed their kayaks into the bay, a heavy layer of fog began drifting across the water. Soon the far shoreline faded into pale gray shapes barely visible through the mist. Still, the water itself was calm and there was no strong wind, so they decided to continue paddling as long as they stayed close together. For a while, the trip was peaceful. Just the sound of their paddles dipping in and out of the water and the occasional call of seabirds somewhere in the distance. Then they heard something else echoing faintly across the bay. The rhythmic splash and creak of wooden oars. Not paddles like theirs, actual rowing oars, the kind you'd hear from a small rowboat. Both of them paused and listened. Somewhere out there in the fog, another boat was moving through the water. A few seconds later, they spotted it. A faint outline gliding across the surface ahead of them. A small wooden rowboat passing silently from left to right. They couldn't see the rower clearly, just a shadow sitting low inside the boat as the oars dipped slowly into the water. The boat disappeared back into the fog after only a few moments. Rodolfo and Edwin shrugged it off and continued paddling toward the shoreline they had been aiming for. But after several minutes, the sound of the oars returned again, this time farther ahead of them. Somehow the rowboat had passed their kayaks, which didn't make much sense because 2 people paddling steadily should normally move faster than a single rowboat. Eventually, they reached the shallow shoreline and dragged their kayaks onto the sand. The fog was still thick enough that the forest beyond the beach looked like a dark wall rising out of the mist. That's when Rodolfo noticed something unusual along the wet sand near the waterline. Footprints. Bare human footprints. Fresh ones too, still filling with water from the tide. The prints started right at the edge of the bay and walked straight toward the forest. Edwin followed the trail of prints with his eyes and then looked back toward the water. And that's when they both saw it. The same wooden rowboat sitting half-beached along the shore about 30 yards away, rocking gently in the shallow water. Empty. Neither of them had seen it approach the beach. and there was no sign of the person who had been rowing it earlier. The only clue that someone had been there at all were those wet barefoot prints leading silently into the foggy forest. What bothered them most afterward was the realization that the direction the rowboat had traveled earlier should have placed it behind them, not ahead, which meant whoever had been rowing somehow passed them in the fog, reached the shore first, stepped out barefoot, and disappeared into the trees before they even arrived. All three stories share one strange detail: the fog itself, thick enough to blur distance, swallow sound, and hide movement in ways that make the world feel unfamiliar. In each case, someone encountered something that shouldn't have been able to move the way it did, appear where it did, or vanish without leaving a trace. And maybe the most unsettling thought is that fog doesn't just hide what's far away. Sometimes it hides what's much closer than we realize. Closer than we realize.